Hi everyone! Today I'm dealing with the big question, what is a TCK? So let's start with the basics. TCK is an acronym that stands for Third Culture Kid. We'll get onto what the third part and what that means in a bit. But for a basic description, a third culture kid is anyone who spends a significant portion of their childhood years living outside their passport country. Generally this is because of their parents' work choices. So the parents have chosen to work or to study elsewhere. Few things to keep in mind. To be a third culture kid as opposed to an immigrant family, this is a family who intends to reside temporarily in another country, who have no intention of taking citizenship there and of settling there forever. Or at least if they plan to live there long term, they do plan to maintain citizenship in another country. Usually the child is expecting to leave at some point, expecting to go to university elsewhere, things like that. Not always, but there's this sense of temporary that makes a family expatriate rather than immigrant, where they are expecting to go home at some point. That said, there's a lot of similarities between TCK's immigrant kids and lots of other kids with these cross-cultural backgrounds. They're actually part of a wider umbrella called cross-cultural kids, or CCKs. So TCKs are one subset of CCK, and I'm going to talk more about cross-cultural kids in another video another day. But today I'm going to focus specifically on the third culture kids and that particular experience. So, a third culture kid is someone who grows up with connections to more than one place because they are legally connected to a country they're not living in. So they're developing emotional connections to a place they're living in but have no legal rights in. Many TCKs grow up in countries where they have not got the path to citizenship. They could never become a citizen, could never immigrate even if they wanted to. Whereas other TCKs choose to immigrate at some point to the country they've lived in as a temporary family. So there's lots of different things that happen in the future, but in the present moment, a third culture kid is someone who's living in borrowed land and space. So why third culture kid? A lot of people say to me, well, I've lived in 5 countries and well past third. A lot of people assume that third culture kids is one country, the country I'm from or the country I'm lived in together makes a third culture. And there's some truth to that. Really what we're talking about is 3 different kinds of cultures. So the term third culture kid dates back to research that was done in the 60s by Ruth Hill Useem in predominantly American expat circles in India. And she was looking at these kids who had American passports but had not lived in America, who lived in India but weren't Indian, and who developed their own kind of in-between culture where they had these shared experiences. And so often there's this misapprehension that a third culture kid, we're talking about that combining of these 2 places. But what we're talking about is these 3 types of cultural influence. So let's go back. First culture. Your first culture is your legal culture. First culture is a legal culture. That means the place that recognizes you, that you have legal rights, that you are a citizen, that the government says you belong here. Permanent residency would also count there because it's a country that you can go into without any questions asked. You don't need a visa, you can just walk in. So a legal culture is not somewhere that you have a visa. It's a place that you don't need a visa because you are recognized as belonging to that country. So when I talk to TCKs around the world, when I've surveyed, the 750 I surveyed for the book, generally speaking, it's around 35% of TCKs have more than one legal culture. So they're a dual citizen, or they've got citizenship in 3 countries, or they're a citizen in one and a permanent resident of another. And everywhere I've gone in the world, every classroom I've been in, that percentage holds. It's around about 1/3 of the kids will have more than one legal culture. Second culture. Second culture is geographic culture, and so these are the places that you have interacted with personally. Now generally that means the countries that you've lived in, and that could be 1, 2, 4, 10, and it may or may not overlap with your legal culture. There are lots of TCKs who have never lived in the country that they have a passport from. I've definitely interviewed kids who'd lived in 6 countries, but none of them they had a passport from. I also include in this heritage cultures. So if you have a parent who's immigrated from a country that you have never lived in and never had a passport from, but you have a strong cultural connection to through that heritage of your family. I would count that as a geographic culture as well. It's a culture that you've had personal interaction with. 40% of TCKs have 4 or more legal cultures, 10% have 6 or more. So again, we're not talking about a number of cultures, because plenty of TCKs hit 3, 4, 5 more, just talking about these two kind of cultures. So third culture is about being in between. It's the experience of having legal and geographic cultures that don't completely overlap, that they don't have a comprehensive connection to one place in childhood, that childhood is split among different legal and emotional entanglements. So third culture is about that shared experience of living in between. And there's lots of different things that can be a part of those shared experiences. Some could be practical, just familiarity with airports and travel, being far away from extended family. And those things aren't necessarily just about TCKs. There's plenty of non-TCKs who have those experiences. I grew up with my grandparents in Australia, and one set I only saw once every 2 years. So that's actually less often than many of today's TCKs see their grandparents. So it's not just that, it's this combined feeling of all of these different emotional and practical experiences, and especially the disconnect of being emotionally connected to a place I'm not legally connected to, and legally connected to a place that I don't share all of those emotional connections to, of not sharing the same childhood experiences as a person with my passport. So if you spend 3 or 4 years of primary school in another country, that's 3 or 4 years of childhood experiences you don't share with other kids in your grade, in your school, in your country. So the third culture childhood experience is often about how living overseas in childhood affects your relationship to your passport country, to your legal country, how it changes your worldview and the way you see things. When you have these experiences where you're connected to more than one place, you don't tend to have that same sense of comprehensive connection. So you don't have the same attitude toward a place. You can't have this single country deep involvement because you're also attached to somewhere else. A lot of this it's difficult to explain simply, but what it means overall is that for a lot of TCKs, that invisible shared community of other people who grew up this way feels like home. I have had so many TCKs in interviews say to me that other TCKs is where they feel most at ease, because they don't have to explain things, that the third culture is their childhood home. One person was saying, other people have childhood homes that are a physical place. For me, my childhood home is this community, because that's where my shared experiences were. And I think that's a great way to put it. When your shared experiences aren't directly connected to a single place, but are connected to this experience of being between places, that community, that invisible community, that lack of geography home, that is your childhood experience, and that's your childhood home. And I think that's a great way to think of it, that your childhood home is not a place, but a set of experiences shared by millions of people around the world. And that's why for a lot of TCKs, it's not a label that is a judgment, but it's a community that is relaxing. Some TCKs don't like the label, don't feel the need to identify with it, don't want to be engaged with a lot of literature and talking about it. They've got their life that's based on other things, and that's perfectly legitimate. And there are others who, especially those who didn't have a TCK community growing up, who find that label really freeing and an explanation of how they feel and doesn't line up with maybe other people in their passport culture. You'll note that I say passport country a lot rather than home country, because home can be a complicated topic, which is something for another time. But passport country is nice and black and white. You either have the passport or you don't. You have citizenship or you don't. And so that's an easy one to say, yes, this is my passport country. So I think that gives you just a bit of a quick rundown on some of the basics of a third culture kid. Obviously, in this, I've touched on so many other topics that I'm going to have to come back to. So we'll have a talk later about cross-cultural kids more broadly, and we'll talk about the concept of home and all these other things. But this is a great way to just get started on what a third culture kid is. Someone who grows up living part or all a child in a country where they don't have a passport and don't expect to stay. Someone who is between these first and second cultures where their legal and geographic cultures don't overlap completely, and who feels at home with others who share that childhood experience of being between places. So that's your primer on third culture kids. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Bye.